Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Deconstructing Data podcast. I'm Adam Fitzgerald, the Enterprise Sales Director at BDEX, and I am here today with BDEX's founder and CEO, David Finkelstein. Good to see you, David. What's new in your world? What's happening?
Yeah, all good, Adam. Good to see you as well. This is kind of a little, different environment for us without Jesse. So, it'll be fun to run it with you today. So I'm looking forward to this guest we have on today too.
Yeah, me too. It's we talk all the time, but it seems a lot more formal in this setting without Jesse today. So, but it is good to see you. Good to be joined by everyone this afternoon. Today on Deconstructing Data, we are thrilled to welcome Jordan Smith, who is the founder and CEO at MyModel Inc.
Yes. Hello, David. Hello, Adam. Thank you so much for having me. I will try to keep it casual and get rid of some of that formality. But I'm really excited to talk to you about today.
Yeah, awesome. We're glad you were able to join us today. And we'd love for you to kick it off for us and give our viewers and listeners an opportunity to get to know you a little bit. Tell us your history and what led you to found MyModel.
Absolutely. So out of college, I started working at Microsoft with enterprise retailers and then moved over to ad tech and saw just really across the board the challenge that businesses face in trying to go beyond the first party data ecosystem and acquiring net new customers. Especially as cookie depreciation goes on and different regulations make it harder for businesses to get access to the quality data they need. It became very clear to me that there needed to be a new solution that put consent right up front. So I asked myself, what would a win-win exchange look like between a brand and the average consumer for this data that is needed to power the market? And that's what we're building MyModel to do, to be truly a win-win that allows for consented data access infrastructure in the B2C space.
Jordan, that sounds super fascinating, and thank you for sharing that. I think today is going to be a great discussion, and so let's just dive right on in with our first topic, which is all about the rise of consent-based data. So, Jordan, maybe you can start us off on this.
Yeah, I mean, consent has become such a popular topic in more social settings and more in a social way, but it's something that when we think about giving consent to platforms, when we sign up, it's a 20-page terms and conditions sheet that is illegible to the average consumer. And so it's consent technically in that you're clicking accept, but it's not informed consent. And I think that's been really detrimental to building consumer trust in tech. So, I mean, at some point, we have to think about how can we get consumers back on board with the innovation that's to come in the tech industry? How can we bring them on board? How can we turn this concept of sharing data from something that is scary to most people and feels out of the hands of most people to something that can feel like empowering and like you're participating in something and has some like real incentive for the user. So that's something that's like really core to how we're building MyModel, is like, how can we make this like easy to understand for the average consumer? I coined this term called digestible transparency. How can we be transparent with consumers in the way that, my 93-year-old grandma in Florida could understand? That should really be how we look at getting real consent from users for their participation in the tech ecosystem.
Are you picking on me because I live in Florida?
Yes.
You hit on a really good point. The interesting thing about it is everyone's been sort of required to sort of prove consent and to sort of force the user to consent to something. And in most cases, they don't know what they're consenting to, right? It's just a little banner across the top of the screen. And behind there somewhere is a long list of, terms and conditions that most people wouldn't understand. So they just click OK. And so like people are consenting today, but to your point, they don't know what they're consenting to. I'm really curious to understand, like, how are you looking to flip the switch so that people understand better what they're consenting to?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, believe it or not, a study came out earlier this year that showed that over 99% of Americans would share data for incentives. The only way that the average consumer really engages in digital consent is through accepting or denying cookies and accepting or denying terms and conditions, both of which are completely opaque and to the average consumer. So this idea of digestible transparency is bringing people on board to the mission of like MyModel, make them feel like they're actively participating in something that really benefits them. I think control is really the key, especially, I've expertise in like the Gen Z market. They feel like they don't have any control over their financial future, their digital health, any of that. And so I think providing interfaces to kind of rebuild that trust through transparency, through being visible, through different kind of engagement, I think is going to be really important in building up that consumer trust that's really been lost.
Interesting. So you saw real quick, there was a question that came on the screen. Whoops. And Layla says, where do you think this trend is going over the next 2 to 5 years? Curious what your thoughts are on that.
In regards to,
I'm assuming that they're referring to the trend with respect to consent and data, just in general. Like, where do you see this going in the next 2 to 5 years?
Well, I think all of the policy and platform changes have really illuminated that consent is needed, consumer consent is needed to power a sustainable supply of consumer data in the economy. It's becoming increasingly difficult for data brokers to function. Cookies are becoming kind of difficult to navigate as well. And so I know your business handles kind of first party data and making insight out of that. This idea of zero party data, which is like directly consented from user to brand, is something that has really like yet to scale in a mass market. And that's kind of our objective with MyModel, is to be able to introduce a framework to the market that brings consent to the average consumer in a palatable way, so that we can have a supply of data that is better because it is compliant, it is equitable, and there's that informed consent and incentive structure to have the average user be willing to share this information.
Yeah, and we've talked about this on our show quite a bit in the past also, just the fact that, like you said, people are willing to share their data, and the vast majority of people are, but it's important for them to sort of feel a level of trust in order to do that. And so trust is a big part of that. And I think to what you're saying is the transparency enables that trust. Without that transparency, it's difficult to trust. But I think that most people are willing to share their data if they, one, trust the brand, and two, understand how that data is going to be used and have that level of transparency. And it doesn't, hurt, like you said, to give them some incentive. If people
Absolutely.
think that they're going to get something better out of that brand, whether it just be better customization, better communication, or in some cases a discount or a coupon or something like that, they're willing to give up their data and give up that information if they feel like they're getting something and they know that they're being heard and their data is going to be held with responsibility.
Absolutely. And kind of the competitive landscape of the zero party data market, MyModel's current competitors in the market are offering, like you mentioned, kind of like rewards or discounts. I believe that people respond to actually having cash in their hands rather than sharing data for a 15% discount at Bed Bath & Beyond. I'd rather have cash in my hands. So there's this saying, data is the new oil, data is as valuable as oil, something that technically the people own, but they really don't have anywhere to interface with it. So being able to have this thing that feels daunting and scary to people when people think about their data and how it's being used, and kind of shifting the view of that to be something that incorporates trust and like personal benefit, I think is really important. Our biggest competitor in market today has about a 30-minute onboarding process that requires you to upload or to give your social security number, to give access to all of your banking accounts. And like, I mean, it's just kind of ridiculous. And so without building the trust beforehand, either before the person downloads the app or throughout the onboarding process, asking someone to give up all of this vulnerable personal information for like a 20% discount or for like $3, I don't think that's going to be enough to incentivize the average consumer to part with something that is very personal.
Yeah, I will certainly agree with that for sure. Like we said, it's all about trust and transparency. Those are the keys. Anything further on this before we jump into the next topic? I think we had the next topic as from cookies to consent. And so I'd love to I think this was a topic that either you or someone on your team suggested. So I'd love for you to kick this off and get your thoughts on this.
Absolutely. So like I mentioned, like cookies, accepting cookies or denying cookies is one of the few interfaces today that the average person has in deciding whether or not they want to share this information with a company. But that being said, it's been shown that the data that is even received from cookies when someone clicks accept all, which the share of those people is becoming fewer and fewer as time goes on. The information that gives to brands is not necessarily relevant to the consumer's actual behavior. To give you an example, when you accept cookies, a brand can see like scroll depth, like how long did you scroll on this page? And they take that information and correlate it to your likelihood to purchase something. I can't tell you how many things I've scrolled just out of kind of curiosity and interest, and maybe stayed on that page. That page was open for an hour, and I had no intent ever on buying that thing. And that company will, for the foreseeable future, think, wow, Jordan is a high intent customer for this like vitamin. So even when you look at the pieces of intent and data that cookies captured in their heyday, it's not as correlated to real consumer behavior as one might think. And that became very apparent to me when I had a marketing leader at one of my previous employers come in to a meeting of ours and tell us that a stat just came out showing that cookie data is only 47% accurate in predicting someone's gender. You would be better off flipping a coin and determining someone's gender than relying on cookie data. So if this is the gold standard, and if this is what's been the gold standard to determine consumer behavior with this really opaque consent system, there has to be something that's clearer. And there should be something that's actually more deterministic of someone's behavior or interests in more depth than time on page, scroll depth, and the insights that can kind of be parsed from a bunch of different sources about a user.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's less. That's a really interesting statistic. Only 47% accurate. So, yeah, I mean that's I think it really comes down to, cookies are really useful for certain aspects of tracking, to track a
Absolutely.
user and track what a user is doing. But, when you're talking about, data and reliable data for use of, targeting enrichment, you have to truly, nothing beats that, consented data, the data that you are asking the user for. Of course, there's always going to be users that are gonna lie when people lie in surveys. So
Totally.
you have to be careful of that. So there's going to be some percentage of that as well. But it all comes back to that incentive, and people are more willing to share with brands that they trust, and that's
Absolutely.
the bottom line.
I think
Yeah.
that's what's been really difficult in scaling a zero-party data solution, is like this precedent that the vehicle for that needs to be a survey. People are not very good at self-reporting their behavior. We all have kind of a bias of what we think we're like, what we think are how likely are you to buy this? Having it be on a Likert scale. How deterministic is that really in whether or not you're going to buy something? I'm not quite sure. So allowing for direct user consent will allow for more deterministic behaviors to be supplied to the market, rather than a lot of these inferences that are made using today's data, again, and specifically navigating zero-party data. And I think this kind of addresses one of the questions in the chat. First-party data is so valuable to mid-market and enterprise that have tons of user touch points across all of their systems, and making valuable use of that data is super important. For smaller and medium-sized businesses who don't have a lot of first-party data to work off of, who don't have endless budget to A/B test different campaigns on Meta or on Google, that's kind of what we're gearing MyModel to be for, is like, how can you find target audiences and learn about them when you don't have all of this first party data or all of this money to do market research and everything else involved with that? And so we're trying to package that as a all-in-one solution, because there's a lot of different problem points here. I mean, I'm curious what you guys see, either from like the sales perspective or the founding perspective of some of the problems navigating this.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, with the last 11 years in the data business, there's always been, it's really interesting. There's when I first got in this business, I was surprised at how accepting companies were, and advertisers, brands, everybody, of the bad data that existed. It was surprising to me. Like, all of the audience data that was out there 11 years ago, and we came on board and we were like, oh, we have to improve data quality. And like, data quality has been sort of our mission from day one. And we would it was shocking going to agencies and talking to agencies about, like, look, we have this audience and we've cleaned it up so much that, here's an audience of potential car buyers. And, what audience are you using now? And they'd just be like, oh, we're using this audience. And we'd look at it and we'd go, well, that audience is impossible. It's like 50 million people. 50 million people are not interested in buying a car right now. There's a million. I can tell you right now, like, there's 1 million cars a month that are sold. So there's not 50 million people that are interested in buying a car. You're wasting so much money trying to reach this audience. And yes, these 1 million people are probably in that audience of 50 million, but how much money are you going to spend advertising to 50 million people when you only need to go to 1 million? And the agencies would say, oh, well, we don't want to target a smaller audience. We don't care how well targeted that is. We have a budget of X million dollars to spend. And if we don't spend it this year, then next year we won't get it again. They're going to give us a lower budget. So it's going to be impossible for me to spend this massive budget on 1 million users. And we were like, wow, this is insane. People are willing to just throw away money. And the brands didn't see it happening, So it's like, but I've seen this evolve. because essentially what happened, like after, through COVID, a lot changed. And it was really interesting how an event like that becomes an economic event, right? And it then changes the course of things. And what really happened was, in that time, was everybody said, well, we have to reduce our spending. We have to look at things closer. And so all of a sudden it started to be more important. Data quality became more important, and looking at, sort of reducing those budgets was important, because now even those agencies, their budgets were getting cut anyway. So now they had to try to get the same performance or better out of a lower budget, and data quality became more and more important. So ever since then, so like you can say from 2020 on, in the last 5 years, data quality has become more and more important. And there's been a much bigger focus. How are you getting that data? Where are you getting it from? And all of that. And so that's where, I see this sort of trend towards consented data becomes more and more important, because now this is all zero party data. This is data that the brand has collected. They know that's, they know the level of quality of it. They don't have to worry about where it came from. And so that's a really sort of crazy trend that I've seen happen in this period of time. And I think it's just getting, more and more important, and especially with all the tools that are available to enable companies to collect their own data and then use that data for targeting, it becomes more, more important. And I think that's a big part of what's caused this new trend towards first and zero party data.
Well, I think you hit on something there, David. I think part of the problem that we've seen over the last several years is also like understanding what questions should I be asking about the data that I'm buying, right? Or the data that I'm leveraging to run these campaigns. So I'm curious from both of you guys, like if I'm the marketing decision maker at a company that's looking to be more strategic and intentional with my use of data, or how I'm leveraging data to run effective and strategic campaigns, what are the questions I should be asking my agency or the data providers and companies that I'm interacting with directly, to really understand where I should be looking for the best quality?
That's a great question. I mean, and David, I would love to hear your definition of like what you are seeing the changed definition of data quality being. I would include things like timeliness, whether or not the insights or the identity resolution is verified. Like, is it a verified person? Is it timely? And like, what's the scope of this information? And how much of the onus is on the brand to make insights out of raw data? I think that's a big challenge too, is like a lot of brands are left navigating really complex like customer data platforms and ingesting data from all these different sources to try to make sense of the insights. So how quick is the time between data ingestion to actionability or insight?
Yeah, very great point, Jordan. For sure, timeliness is super important. Man, we've tested data sets where people send it to us, and let's say, for example, it's tied to a mobile ID. Well, we keep mobile IDs back for years and years and years. So I can go back and I can run that against our graph and see that the data is tied to a mobile ID from 7 years ago. Guess what? It's not around anymore, and this is real, like these are real things that have happened that, that we see all the time. And so timeliness is so important. It's like understanding, when that data was collected, especially for things that are time sensitive, right? And those are like the example that I gave you of people that are interested in buying a car, like that can change very quickly. Buying a home, whatever, any product for that matter. Like the person you may have seen the person in market, but if they were in market 30 days ago, that doesn't mean they're in market today.
Absolutely.
And the crazy thing is, like when 11 years ago, when we started this business, most data was not updated in any greater, any shorter time frame than 30 days. It was usually 30, 60, or 90 days. That was it. And so like we introduced the idea of like, hey, data should be real time, like that doesn't really fly anymore. Like this data, like we went to all the data companies and said, look, what you're doing is is basically trying to sell something to somebody that was interested in something 30, 60, or 90 days ago. They're not today, So that timeliness is super important. But, understanding how that data was collected is super important. A lot of times people say it was consented data, but to our point, earlier, it's like just because they clicked on something doesn't really mean that that they have any intention behind that consent. That doesn't mean that they're actually interested in buying your product. Those are really important, and there's so much fraud out there. There's so many IDs linked to fraud that understanding whether this data is actually linked to a real person is another oddly true point. It's like, we sit here all the time and you're logging in to something and something says, oh, we have to make sure you're not a bot, and you're a human saying like, this is ridiculous, the computer is asking me if I'm a bot. But the reality is there's so much data that's linked to IDs that are bot related that advertisers don't realize it, but they're advertising to these bots and not to real people. And then they wonder why the performance is bad. And so that's another really important point and something we're really focused on is data quality with respect to guaranteeing that you're reaching real people and not bots, click farms, and other things like that too. So that's another important aspect as well.
Yeah, I think that's great. Well, in the interest of time, I think we probably should go ahead and move to our third topic, which is all about the future of data transactions. And so, Jordan, we'll let you start us off with this one as well.
Looking at it from the lens of like consumer to business data transactions, rather than business to business, I think we've reached a ceiling in how businesses can transact consumer data between one another. And I think it's going to get increasingly harder without explicit user consent. The changing policies and legislation and platform shifts, I think, make it really necessary for a consent infrastructure and therefore like a real sale to take place. And so I think the market is going to look really different in the next couple of years. And I hope to influence a lot of change with that, with MyModel as well. And like connecting the supply of people who are willing to share data for incentive and these brands who need quicker signal to insight time, who need like higher certainty of consent. There's so much that complicates the system today of selling consumer data B2B that this zero party data phenomenon is something that is going to be required for there to be a sustainable supply in the market, and is going to be required to get consumers on board with the fact that their data is powering a market. Up until now, it's been whether you like it or not. And now brands are being required or like more required or incentivized to get explicit consent through these policy changes. But there's nowhere really platforming those exchanges. And that's what we're looking to do with MyModel.
Yeah, so Layla just asked, curious what signals tell you that users are ready to engage in transparent data sharing? What are the things that you guys are looking for there?
In regards to like the average consumer's willingness to.
Yep. Yeah. So So the idea that like, what's the signal that tells you the user's ready to share their data? At one point, do you say, okay, this user is ready to share their data? What has to happen? Is it just the transparency alone, do you think, is enough to say, okay, this user, if we're transparent, they're going to share their data? Or is there some other signals that you're looking at to say, okay, this is somebody that's going to share their data if we do this?
I would say there's two main things. Aligned incentives. So feeling like you're not giving up more than you're getting. And trust. Like,
Yeah.
people there's this sentiment towards like the tech bros that I think is really, really eroded consumer trust in tech and in data that needs to be reversed. And so building trust from day one before you launch, building, support in communities for people who, I mean, most Americans, I think over 50% of Americans have less than $500 in their savings account. And so there really is a need for economic empowerment and a desire for agency and control in one's life that I think can be delivered the right way to them with this ability to participate with like transparent consent into the data economy, which when you're thinking of generation defining industries, industrial, oil, data, like it really is what's going to power the next 100 plus years. And being hostile towards people, like a hostile acquisition of people's data through like really opaque terms and conditions is not going to be viable for much longer.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the trust is definitely the key to that, for sure. And actually, I wanted to also share my thoughts on the future of data transactions because I think this we are in no way prepared for what it's going to look like in a few years. When we look at the way AI is transforming everything, I think that in a few years, data itself is going to be, it's going to be transacted more programmatically, like advertising. And it's just a matter of time because there's so much data about so many people that is changing hands today. I just think that the landscape for data is going to be so different in just a few years than it is today. And I think consent is a big part of that because the user will have to consent to that data transaction. But that once they consent to it, the idea that data can then be, communicated in a programmatic way across, platforms and across, two brands for use for targeting anything from TV advertising, online advertising, email, direct mail, whatever it is. I think it will be shockingly different than the way it works today, which in today, most data is transacted pretty manually. And so it's like data is collected somewhere, you make an agreement with somebody, you share some data, it gets used for something, and then you're doing the same thing kind of over here with another company and doing the same thing over there with another company. I think we're going to see something very dramatic, some dramatic changes over the next few years from that.
I completely agree. And I think, I don't know if you guys saw in the news today, the Reddit lawsuit against Perplexity. This is also a problem in B2B data transactions and this lack of clarity of what is public information, what information can LLMs be trained on, what is the consent infrastructure there, Reddit typically licenses access to like Google and OpenAI for them to use Reddit data, but it's a forum. So is that publicly available data or information? Is this like, how is this going to look in B2B or B2C? And I think consent infrastructure is at the core of solving the problems on both markets or in both markets.
Yeah, it's such an interesting question too, because you'd say that since the data is publicly available, the content on Reddit, that in theory it's who owns it, right? Does Reddit really own it? It's all in Google, and they're claiming that Perplexity scraped it from Google, not from Reddit, which is really interesting that they actually pulled it from Google results. And so now you get into this sort of weird situation where it's like they're claiming it's their data, but that it was stolen, but it was stolen from another site that was, allegedly allowed to use their data. So I don't know, it's just weird. But yeah, it's a strange world for sure. All right, well, we're running out of time, so we should get to the last topic. I think we hit the future of data transactions, and now into tech stack, Jordan. And we'd love to give you an opportunity to share some of your tools and your favorite tools in your tech stack, which helps our listeners learn a little bit about how we operate our days.
Absolutely. I would say first, Otter AI as my call recorder. You can engage with, transcripts from your calls in very natural language. It's so helpful. And, recalling different components of conversations. You can get proactive reminders for follow-ups, and it's just a really intuitive platform. So I've been a fan of Otter, using Otter for over a year. Specifically, when we're talking early stage startups, CRMs, Attio, there's no better bang for your buck. It's a great platform. It's got a lot of capabilities. And similarly, I would say Apollo in the sales process, finding new customers, sending email campaigns. Apollo is really great as well.
Cool. Yeah. I don't think I've heard of Attio, so that's an interesting one. We use High Level on the CRM side, but and Salesforce actually, but I'll have to check that one out. But yes, we've heard Apollo a number of times too. So thank you. Yeah, appreciate you sharing that.
Absolutely.
Well, Jordan, thanks for being part of the podcast today. In closing, do you want to tell listeners how they can find you, where they can find you, how they can get in touch with you?
Absolutely. Getmymodel.com/join to join the waitlist. We will have our beta launch by the end of the year. We'll be looking for the first brands to bring on board to our platform to get ethically sourced data directly from the source, win over consumers with informed consent and payment for this data they've been giving up for free. So if you're interested in joining the pilot, beta, or using the platform and getting paid for your data, getmymodel.com has all of that. You can find me on LinkedIn, Jordan Michelle Smith, and I recently started some social accounts under the handle The Anti-Tech Bro. So follow me on those as well. Not really an well, no, I am an anti-tech bro. Why not? But thank you guys so much for having me today. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Absolutely,
Yeah, absolutely.
Jordan. Yeah, we appreciate you spending the time with us today. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you both. Thank you as well, David, for making time to be part of this conversation as well. For those that are listening, we invite you to get powered by BDEX as well. BDEX has an industry-leading identity graph that is the trusted foundation powering some of the top ad tech and martech platforms across the ecosystem today. And so our comprehensive identity resolution drives results across every channel, from precision ad targeting and website visitor retargeting to direct mail campaigns, lead generation, and turning anonymous website traffic into actionable consumer intelligence. So whether you're looking to enhance your targeting accuracy, recover abandoned carts, scale your lead generation efforts, or just maximize performance across your digital and offline channels, BDEX delivers the most accurate identity resolution in the industry. And as David alluded to earlier, we eliminate bots and bad data and really have a laser focus on the quality of the data that helps to prevent waste in your marketing budget, while at the same time providing real and verified audiences that drive a strong ROI. So we invite you to join platforms that trust BDEX to power their success. You do that by visiting bdex.com, click on the Talk to an Expert page, and we will love to get connected with you to help you get powered by BDEX. Thanks everyone for being part of the show today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you, Adam. Thanks, David. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.